Leave your ego at the door and get ready to be raw. This is Strength to Overcome, where real men find their strength in weakness. The Strength to Overcome podcast. I'm Ryan with my co-host Matt, and we're here today with a special Father's Day weekend episode. We're going to be talking about some pretty cool things related to fatherhood. And Matt, it's great to have you here with us, brother. How you doing?
Yeah, good, mate. Super pumped for this episode. And it's funny, I know behind the scenes we were talking about content, and it was just amazing to realize that we had already planned to have this episode. And it was only after the fact that I realized it was going to be a Father's Day weekend because in Australia, Father's Day is in September. So, of course, I'm not thinking Father's Day's, coming up. So it just happened to line up. And I think it's a divine appointment for us to be having this conversation just a few weeks before, baby boy arrives for you guys.
Yep, we've got, I guess our little countdown calendar says 4 weeks to go. So we'll be, at the time of this release, about 36 weeks along and I guess officially on call and ready to go any moment for baby boy Robertson to get here. So we're pretty pumped for that and getting everything ready to rock. And this weekend, I can always remember Father's Day because it's the U.S. Open, right? That's the golf tournament is U.S. Open weekend. It seems to end on Sunday, Father's Day. So we've got a special Oakmont U.S. Open to take in this week as well on the golf course. So that's going to be something to watch.
It's funny you'd bring that up because I do like the golf and I do like to watch the majors, and it was completely off my radar that was happening this weekend. And that's probably because I've got my sister and her husband have just rolled in from Australia. And, it's kind of cool because I'm the youngest of five, she's the oldest. And, we were, over the last 6, 7 years, we were just sort of, separated by a distance and, just a real busy lifestyle for both of us. And over the last few months, we've reconnected. And, when she was here in February, I don't know if I talked about this, but she came. I've got a good friend of mine who's a pilot and just happened to be able to get her on a plane to come visit for, a little over a week back in February. And it was a random, reconnection of that time. And just as she left, she says, let me bring Andrew back, her husband, and we'll be back. Well, I didn't expect it would be this soon. So here they are with us, and they're here to help me through this recovery. And, just been a real blessing to have that reconnection and that time with her. We were always close growing up. And my brother-in-law, who was in my life from when I was about 5, which is the same age as my oldest Callie. And so he was a, big brother type father figure to me. My dad was born in, 1930. And so I always had that older dad growing up. And so, my big brother-in-law, Andrew, was a important role model to me as a kid. And, so it was a real blessing to have him. He taught me how to play golf and taught me how to drive and, a lot of really cool stuff that happened. And, they had 2 kids when I was 12. Well, they started having kids when I was 12. So I was an uncle at 12 and, just loved those 2 little girls. And so now, full circle, here I am, also with 2 little girls, and they are the same age as I was when he was introduced to my life. So I've had this, father figure role model in him. And, we joked just before I came on air here, I joked about, hey, listen, this week's episode's all about you two. My sister said, well, careful, because I got a lot more stories about you than you do of me. And, I just wanted to share with the audience. I think a lot of times people might wonder, why are you guys sharing so much stuff about what's going on in your life? You're talking to your spouses about this, and, are you, having these sort of conversations behind the scenes, with those that matter? And, I think a lot of people might need to hear that, yeah, we're doing our absolute best to be great husbands and, great fathers and upcoming fathers and great employees and great friends and great sons. We're doing our absolute best, and we feel called to, share some of this stuff, not because we're not able to share at home or not because we're, push our story out there, but we really are trying to help people that might want to be able to talk about stuff. I know there's some people I've had conversations with and they've been struggling through some stuff privately, and I didn't know that. And it's been great for me to be able to just bounce some stuff off of them and vice versa. And I think this has helped at least a handful of people I know. So that's why we do this. I don't know if you want to lean into a little bit of that and your perspective on that, but I think it's important for people to realize we're not just here lollygagging because I'm injured and you've got a baby coming and we've got nothing else to do. We actually have a vision here of helping a larger group of people struggling, men and women.
Yeah. I've talked to a few people along the way, especially about the alcohol, the bourbon thing, and they've told me that they've either experienced similar things or struggled with things related to that, especially, the bourbon, the whiskey community is it's pretty large, even in where I am now, but back in Virginia it was as well. And so, as you can imagine, that lends itself to a number of different issues that can pop up with getting into that as a hobby. So I've talked to quite a few folks that are in that space, and I think it's probably going on a lot more than people want to admit that they're struggling with a hobby that's kind of turned against them in a way. So that's been my positive feedback, and I'm excited to kind of dive into fatherhood stuff, and it's cool to hear that you got these guests in town. And I believe this is the sister that I've met, correct? She was in Roanoke in 2011. Is that right? Is this the one?
Wow. Now you
Because
just
this is
like I just
Allie's
had
mom, right?
this is yes. So just had a bunch of hills run
She
over me.
was
Yeah.
in she was in town because I remember a day or two I gave her a ride home from your gym in the Corvette because she had to get back to your house, I guess, or was she staying at your house at the time?
Yes. Okay. So we're gonna have to do a little segue here back to our original topic. But was it whose Corvette was it at the time?
I think you had just recently sold it to me, and because this would have been, I guess, beginning of 2011 range, or somewhere in that, maybe even mid 2011, and so it was, probably 6 or 7 months post acquisition when you sold me the Corvette for that first time.
Yeah, I'll try and do this in about 60 seconds because we're getting off topic here. But it's kind of funny because I remember my brother-in-law Andrew coming over at one point, and at the time in my home we had a BMW Z4 and a Corvette, and I also had the Outback wagon. But we had these two sports cars, like living like we were, some sort of royalty. But he would drive those. He, spent some time with us, and he would, drive one and the other and compare the handling as a, car enthusiast. And so I remember the time where I had this Corvette for a couple of years, and living in Roanoke, Virginia, for those in Australia that don't know, you've got 3 or 4 months where it's cold, it's wet, it's snowing, there's black ice. Like it's a dangerous vehicle to be, getting silly in. And so I had this thing for about 2 years, and I remember one day you came into the gym and you said, "Hey," now I might be wrong on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you said, "Hey, can I borrow the Corvette?" I think you had a date. Is this right?
It was either a date or I was going to show my parents because it was my birthday coming up. Because I remember you let me borrow it for a day or two, and it was right
Yeah.
around the time of my birthday.
Yeah, my recollection was it was for a date, so let's run with that. It's a cooler story. And so I let you, you came into the gym and we were talking about it, and you're like, "Hey, can I borrow the, that?" And I threw you the keys. I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And you said, "Well, how would I get back to you?" I said, "I'll see you tomorrow." And I'm like, "Keep it, whatever, I don't care." And so you took it. I drove your car home that night. You took the vet, and then the next day you came in for your workout, and you come in and you said something along the lines of, I loved it, would you be interested in selling it? And my recollection is that I jumped on the internet, looked up the Kelly Blue Book price, and I said, yeah, I'll sell it for that. And I think
Yeah,
within 24 or 48 hours, you showed up with a check for the Corvette.
yeah. I
And
went to the bank.
it was over. Like I went from owning a Corvette to like, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah,
Is that
I just swooped in, and I think that's about right. I drove it for that day or two. My parents were in town, and I kind of showed it off to them, and I loved it so much. And yeah, I swooped in and got a check, and all of a sudden I was the person driving the Corvette in the snow and rain and ice.
It was great. I
That's
loved it. It
funny.
was a great vehicle and I had a lot of fun in it. And I hope you did enjoy it too. I know they designed it to fit two sets of golf clubs with two sets of shoes in the back. And so they really had
Yeah,
designed it for the retired golfer or the dentist or the doctor that had a sports car and it could fit two sets of clubs with shoes in it. So it's funny to remember that story and that you actually remember taking my sister home from the gym or whatever in the vehicle that I remember being the owner of, but in the end it was yours.
yeah, yeah. So she must have come to visit for a period there the following year, and I don't think Andrew was with her. I think it was just her had come over to visit her daughter.
That's right. That's right. Her daughter was living with us at the time and had been there for quite a while. So, yeah, wow. I mean, it's funny how everything's kind of coming back together now. And she's flown in here this week and she's talked about the podcast and, said a few things. And she's just got some great things to say and how courageous you've been in your, sharing your story. So it's kind of cool that this has come full circle for us.
I mean, we're sitting here, what, 14 years later, and we're talking about having a podcast about kids. Back then, I don't know where your thoughts were back then, but I don't know if kids were in the cards for you back then at that time, right? It was just something that wasn't really a thing.
Yeah, and I think I've talked a little bit about this in a previous episode, but definitely, I was married previously for 17 years, and there was, I think throughout that 17 years, there were definitely times where we probably had a discussion about having a family. And, by the time we got to the point where we had our own gym and we had our own clientele base, and we were kind of living this life of driving sports cars and playing golf when we wanted to and traveling on cruises and such. And I think it just got to the point where kids were not as appealing, at least from her perspective. I think I probably always wanted them a little bit more than she did because I'd grown up as an uncle with, my two nieces. And so I had always thought, I think I'd be a good dad. I think I'd be a fun dad. And so I always wanted them, but it just never lined up. And I think by the time we got to the place where we were financially in a position we could, do it and do it comfortably, I think, she'd built up a clientele. I had a good clientele. We had the business running. And, I'd started digging in on some things that were kind of just driving us apart, as I've talked about in that episode, where I think it probably scared her to think, well, we're going in different directions on our habits and hobbies and things we want to do and people we want to spend time with. And so I think it probably just scared her a little bit. I don't want to speak for her, but I just think it kind of drove a little bit of a wedge in. And of course, if you're not really on the same page in most areas, then having children really just kind of scares you a little bit. And so I think for both of us, we probably said, you know what, this is just not the right time to bring a child into the world, and things weren't good, and so it just never happened, and that kind of really saddened me at the time. I know that it was something I really wanted, and even as we were reconnecting and trying to make things work in Mexico, I remember having the discussion. We were trying to heal from some 6, 12 months of, really big trials. And, I remember having that discussion about, hey, listen, we're in Mexico, we've sold the business, we've sold our home, how are we going to restart? What does it look like for you? And I remember at the time, I'd be like, let's start a family, like let's do that, let's rebuild by, creating life and doing that. And there's, people out there go, have you lost your mind? Well, spoiler alert, we didn't have kids, so ease up, right? Um, it didn't pan out that we had kids. In fact, that probably might have, helped put the nail in the coffin to even be talking about it. And so we never did have them. And going through my fast, and then it's funny, I was thinking about just this morning. I think it's about 8 months ago to the day that I had left America and I'd gone back home to Australia. I think it was June, right around the first week of June in 2017, that I had gone back to Australia with a backpack. You know that movie You, Me and Dupree, right? I had a backpack, had some money in the bank account from selling the house and business and such, but I didn't know where I was going, what I was doing. I was sleeping in a spare bedroom with a backpack of clothes, healing from fast, and no hope of having kids. And in fact, at that age, I just thought I would probably, if I ever did find someone to be married to or with, I'd maybe at best have stepkids. So it was a really tough time. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely and sometimes I reflect back to that time when I'm having a tough time here with the marriage and finances and my injury. And I just look at my kids. I'm like, man, 8 years ago, you were Dupree. You were Owen Wilson with a backpack coming back from a fast. You looked ridiculous. You had, no clothes. You had a few bucks in the bank and, like, no relationship. So, I mean, don't be so damn, moany groany, right? And be grateful, be thankful, be optimistic of what the future holds, right? So, to throw it back to you now, you're in a position where you've got, 3 or 4 weeks, like you say, and all these emotions and things that you've shared. How are you preparing for, what's about to hit you any day now? I mean, it can come early, right? So, I mean, where are you at with everything you're going through?
Yeah, I mean, I'm preparing the best I can. Eric has done a great job of keeping us on track with the physical side of things, with the nursery and all the items that we need, the registry, and all that is pretty well set. And so on the physical side, it's there. And as weird as it sounds, I think we're both used to this a little bit in a way. I know this is going to sound strange, but the fact that we've got three dogs almost helps itself a little bit in that we are already responsible for something other than us. We've already
Yeah.
kind of dealt with the fact that we can't just take off and go on vacation in a moment's notice. We can't go on a cruise tomorrow. We have to arrange, care. So even though these three dogs that we love and take care of are here as animals and pets, they're almost like our children in a way. So that I think has helped us a little bit in that we're already in this mindset of we have a responsibility day in and day out. Now it's of course going to get taken to, as you know, a whole nother level when the baby gets here. That's going to be a whole new ball game. But I'll credit the dogs a little bit for preparing us. At least we both have that sense of responsibility day in and day out already.
Yeah, yeah. I see people walking their dogs every morning, and quite often, they've got a new one, or you know, they've got an old one, and they'll talk about, getting a new one. They're like, oh my goodness, it'd be easier to have a kid than start another dog. People look at it from both perspectives. I think there's a lot of people out there that recognize when you get a puppy, that thing is going to pee every, hour through the night and bark and yap, and your life just stops. And so people often will say, geez, I don't know if I want to get another dog. Like, I really miss my freedom. So I think you're right in that you've got a little, intro into the fact that, yeah, I mean, you can't just pick up and go. And I think that's what a lot of people miss when they, get a dog or start a family, right? It's like, oh, gee, so at least you've got that, because that's a big thing. My wife will often say, like, you can't just, go and do something selfishly, right? Like, that just disappears. And so that creates, yeah, it can be tough,
Yeah, that's going to be gone. And, for me, the big challenge is just the simple fact that I haven't been around a lot of babies. And you probably hadn't either, right? But I had a client who had a baby. He was actually turned into a coach of ours who had a baby at the gym years ago. This was probably 2017, 2018. And I think that's the last baby I actually held, right? Was this little baby in the gym, and people thought it would be funny to have Coach Ryan hold the baby and get a picture of him. So that limited experience. Now Erica has quite a bit more because she's got three godchildren that she helped take care of and raise in the very beginning. I remember she didn't move, but she went to Tennessee and actually stayed with the family and took care of these tiny little babies for a period of time. So she's got a lot more experience with that sort of thing than I do. But I mean, were you kind of in my boat where you didn't have a very uh, broad introduction or history with babies prior to your little one Callie being born, right?
Yeah, I mean, my recollection was when I was 12 and, my sister had her first. And so my teenage years were influenced heavily with these two kids, but it was as a teenager, right? Not as an adult. And so, we're talking some 25 years later when I had mine, that that memory and recollection of being around babies was, a completely changed, or, I'd forgotten, right? I mean, again, you're 12 years old, you're not responsible for the baby, or certainly not, in a position where I was even taking them around. So, I mean, by the time I was able to drive and take them to places, they weren't babies. So that whole baby type, you know, time period, that 0 to, 18-month window, I was around them a lot, but I wasn't in a position where I could take them, do anything, go get groceries and do anything. I had to wait till I was, 18 in Australia before you can drive on your own. So, 6, 7 years later, and of course, they're much older and more manageable at that age. The 0 to 18 month is tough as a dad that's going to, be staying at home. For those that haven't watched previous episodes, you're going to be staying at home while your wife is working.
Yeah, and I've got no prior training, no prior background. So for me, I've got to learn from the basics. We've got to start with changing a diaper and then progress into, okay, how do we get the baby into a stroller safely? And how do we how do we go for a walk? How do we and then, everything is going to be new from the time we get home, probably a laundry list of 15 to 20 skills that I guess you could call them skills, right? I've got to learn 15 to 20 brand new parenting skills on the fly.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember when Callie was born. We woke up. It was a Friday morning, and I was meant to speak at my at a meeting, a general, managers meeting for my position at Crunch, and I was a lead speaker at this event, and I was on my way to this event, and I called the owner of the company and I said, "Man, I think my wife's going into labor today." And he said, "This is Steve Kleinfelter. I talked about him last week in last week's episode. I called him and he said, Matt, you get one chance, you get one experience, one moment, that first time becoming a dad." He goes, "If it is today, then you can't miss it for speaking at our meeting. You need to go home." And again, that's just part of why this man means so much to me. And I remember talking to my good friend Stephen Adams as well, about it. And he's like, "Dude, what are you doing?" And he didn't have kids, but he was a very mature soul. And so he said, "Go home." Both these men had their, priorities set in order, and they both said, "Go home." Well, it was a good thing I did because, by the time I turned around and drove home, she was, well into the throes of labor. And, 6 hours later, the baby was with us, right? And so, within 12 hours of those conversations, I was like you, right? I was at home. I've got this baby in this car seat going inside. 12 hours after, being on my way to work, I was like, "Oh, wow, now you're a dad." And you look at it and you go, "What the hell am I meant to do with this thing?" Right? And so I was thinking about it this morning. As a lot of people know, I go on my 3 mile walks every morning, and I look for that inspiration. And particularly when we're about to shoot an episode, I say, "Hey, what message do you want me to share?" And quite often the message isn't for everyone out there. It's actually for me. And as I struggle through my challenges right now, I was thinking about it, and these are the questions that I'm going to ask you now. If you were on a boat and there were 20 men on a boat, who would be the leader within those 20 men on a boat? Who would you say is the leader?
The captain.
Captain, right? It's obvious to you, right? It wouldn't be the guy, with the most money. It wouldn't be the guy with the hottest wife. It would be the captain, right? And so, if you're in a gym and you've got 20 guys in a room all about to work out, who would you say is the leader of those 20 guys?
Coach, the guy with the most experience.
Okay, same again, right? So again, all these other things are irrelevant. And if I was to go to a golf course and there's 20 guys hitting balls on a driving range, who would be the leader out of those 20 guys?
Look for the guy with pants on who's a PGA pro, right?
Exactly, right? Everyone else is in shorts or jeans and, cut off, right? So, you've got this pattern where, if you're on a plane and you've got 20 guys and all of a sudden, something goes down with the pilot, everyone's going to look around and you're all going to say, Who's got who's got some pilot experience? Who's ever flown a plane before, right? That guy gets to step up. And so my question now to you is, you're about to be a dad, right? So you've got 20 guys in a hospital and all their spouses are, about to give birth. Which one of those is the leader? These 20 guys are all first time dads, right? Never had kids before. And out of those 20 guys, which one's the leader now?
Yeah, I don't know.
So, I mean, I didn't come up with this to trick you. It was just something that came to me as I'm walking home this morning on my walk. I'm like, there is something that feels so, you feel so unprepared. You feel so at a loss. You feel so alone in this moment. You're like, you have been the golf pro on the range. I have been the guy in the gym that knows my stuff. I've been on a boat where there's a captain. And in all of those scenarios, you're looking to the person that has the most experience, the most hours at the wheel, or, the most wisdom in that field. And so when you become a first-time dad, I think that there's this void, there's this lacking community for guys to be vulnerable enough to reach out to another guy that's had kids and been there and say, "I don't know what I'm doing. What am I up against? What am I looking for here? How do I navigate this?" And I felt incredibly ill-equipped, but it was a lot to do with the fact that we moved from California to Florida with our firstborn 8 weeks old just to get out of an expensive situation out there and to have a home, right? So I got to Florida and I had this 8-week-old baby and I felt like I'd lost my community, my friends, my family that, I'd become close with out there. Not blood family, but, family that become good friends with, and so I lost all of that, and I just did a really poor job. I think I really struggled in that period. So my question again would now be, well, who's your community and who do you have around you that you can draw from so that you don't feel isolated? Because that's what us guys do, man. We want to be heroes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, right now the community just consists of of course, my wife and my mom, who's here in town with us now. So she lives in Jacksonville. And then, we're going to have certain friends and family coming into town throughout the first, weeks of life. So my dad and stepmom will come down to help. And, I'm sure Erica's aunt will come down at some point to help as well. So that's kind of the immediate community around us.
Yeah, and what was your relationship like as a kid with your dad? Because I mean, obviously we have all talked about it, and everyone knows it, right? You're going to draw from a lot of those experiences. So how was that for you as a little fella?
It was a little tough, Parents were fighting a lot when I was a little kid. The divorce happened when I was, what, 6 or 7. From 6 or 7 on, I just lived with my mom. And, I would see my dad on the weekends. I would go over to his house on Friday nights and stay for, 12 to 18 hours and come home Saturday afternoon. And that was the extent of my time with my dad from age, what, 7 till 18. So I kind of missed those years in a way. But early on, I don't have a huge recall, as I'm sure a lot of people don't. But I do remember there was a lot of fighting and unhappiness in the marriage leading up to the split. So unfortunately, that's a lot of what I've got to draw back on. And I've got to work hard to put that out of my head, in this situation, this new upcoming life that's getting ready to happen, because we really don't want a repeat of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly, know as we've talked about in a previous, book, and I think most people realize that, yeah, you learn what you live. Obviously your experience as a little guy and growing up was, unfortunate in that they weren't together. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say unfortunate because I'm speaking for you there, but you certainly weren't in a a home that was, it seemed very calm and such. So do you find now, as the tension builds and you get closer to this moment, are you struggling with emotions and, those things are starting to well up inside of you, right? How are you going to keep those down? And what's it been like for the last week or so as you get closer here?
Yeah, I think tensions are getting higher and things are increasing to a point where, we've had a few spats and it's been a little tough to kind of sit and wait these last 4 or 5 weeks. And, then the thoughts creep into my head that, I don't want to do anything or miss any part of my son's early life and that sort of thing. I want to be the father that is there for him and is a part of his upbringing for the first, 18 years of his life and not just a part-time thing, right? I want to be the main player, the 50% player, or even more if I'm going to be the stay-at-home dad, right? So I've got to, deal with those emotions of, how are we going to make things work and support each other and also find a relationship that is going to last, a life, not only a lifetime, but enough time for us to be able to raise this little guy and instill the things that we want to instill in him, and hopefully not pass on the things that were unfortunately passed on to us as kids when we were in our situations.
Yeah, what have you found that you guys having conflict on now as you get closer? The tensions do rise, and there's a lot of uncertainty you've talked about in your previous episodes of, trying to find your identity and your career path that you're trying to figure out. Do I still keep the TPC, right? What are you guys having the conflict about recently?
It's mostly just the same negative cycle stuff, fears and misunderstandings that have kind of plagued the relationship in the past. And, that's one of those things like we talked about it in what was that, episode 6 with relationships, that negative cycle tends to hit. Somebody has built-in fears and anxieties, and one person might be a little avoidant and not willing to share, not willing to be open, and it can come off as unsupportive, and it can be seen as, that person is not there for me. And that's a little bit of what we've struggled with in the last week or so, just being on the same page with that and just trying to stay open and stay communicative with each other. And for me personally, it feels it's hard to stay open because my personality and my default is to kind of shut down, go quiet, and go into my own little world. And that doesn't work too well when you're in a situation in a relationship and you've got to be there for your partner, and it's an extremely difficult but also important time in both our lives where we were getting ready to welcome a kid to the world.
Yeah, I mean, sleep deprivation and having the extra responsibilities that are about to just stack up on top of you are going to kind of exacerbate those emotions. How have you been able to self-regulate, or have you been able to, during these negative cycles?
Yeah, it's been tough, trying to fall back on some of the things we learned in that book and also just doing some deep breathing. Haven't been doing great with it, but just trying to breathe deeply, big, long, deep breaths and kind of let the nervous system calm down and not catastrophize the situation and kind of stay grounded in that way. Probably going to try to go for a walk later today and just kind of clear the head and just move the body a little bit. That's something that I think is going to be important for me too, is to stay active during this time and not let the fitness get away from me too far.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know that we go back to our vices. Even yesterday, I've got my family here, and, things kind of, tension seems to settle when there's a few extra people around to break that up. Sometimes it can go the opposite way. But, even myself, I've found that, I have those negative things pop up in my head, and you can get easily caught up in wanting to find that dopamine hit, right? And so we've each talked about our, pasts and things like that. How are you handling, that call from, the shelf, the bourbon shelf, as your solution when you guys do have these tough times? And in Australia, we call them a blue, right? A spat is a blue. You have a blue with a missus. And how are you handling that call, right? That nagging, demon on the shoulder that's saying, yeah, hey, listen, all this can go away. Just have a few drinks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I've tried to maintain that limit I set for myself of not over consuming and not having drink after drink after drink, because that can spiral things in the wrong direction quickly. Staying true to, hey, I'm going to have a drink, or I'm going to have a couple drinks and not let it get out of control and go to bed and intoxicated, wake up late the next morning and spiral out of control that way is kind of my challenge. And, I've been doing okay with it. Could it be better? Yeah. Could it be worse? Yeah. But at this point, it's one of those things where coming from where we came from and some of the past trauma that we experienced with the alcohol thing, it's definitely more under control now than it was back then. So that's a positive thing.
Yeah, and I would encourage you, live on the air here to, I've been your trainer and I've been your friend for a long time, but there was obviously a 10 or 12-year gap there. So, this is coming from a place of love, of I know you well and I know how you operate, and I know that you set the bar so high on yourself. As a golf pro, I remember back then, and as a client in my gym at the time, not as an entrepreneur, as a, you hadn't gotten in shape yet. You came in and you're kind of flubby and didn't really have a good base to work from, which was why you got a trainer in the first place, right? So, I lean back on, you being a much younger version of me being in my prime, and just say that right now my encouragement to you is something that I didn't do. And that was surround yourself with people that you can, in the battle that you're in right now, when you really want to reach for that extra drink above your threshold, or, you've said something that wasn't what you really wanted to say, or you just got it wrong and it blew up on you, right? It just kind of combusted, unexpectedly. You've got to have someone you can call, go for your walk. You've got to put in place a couple of fail safes, because, unfortunately, I made so many mistakes in those first 5.5 years of my first kid's life. And, now obviously I've got two. I haven't talked about Chloe at all today, but, we were talking about that introduction into becoming a father, but now I've got two. And I learnt a lot from the mistakes I made with the first one, that I got better with the second, but I've still made a lot of mistakes that I made with the second. There's a great book I'm reading right now that I've sent you, and I'm going to encourage you to read that too, because I want you to enter into this phase and learn from the mistakes that I've made. So I've done a little bit of that recently. I've hit you up during the week. I've hit another buddy of mine up, Stretch, who I've talked about, and he's done a guest episode. So if you haven't watched or listened to that one, everyone go back and listen to that episode there. He was an incredible, asset to me during that time, and still is. And I've reconnected with him in a really deep way lately, and I've just found that just having someone to be able to call when the shit in the fan, you're sleep deprived, you're fighting with the missus, your intimacy's dropped off, so you don't have any kind of release now. The bourbon's calling you, your dopamine hit that you've reached and relied on for so long is now gone, and it's all going to come crumbling in on you really quickly. And I think that as a first-time dad and husband over here, I just got so much wrong. I made so many mistakes. I was so hostile. I had the mother-in-law living with us because she had just moved here. Like there was so many pressure cooker things that were going on, and you try and take it all on board yourself, and like I've got this. Like I'm a man. I've got this. I can lead. And it's like eventually it takes its toll, right? You try and do too much. You can't do it all. And so my encouragement to you is to build that community. Have a couple of people you can reach out to, whether it's me or not, doesn't matter. But I'm saying have those couple of people. So when you are reaching for that extra drink or that habit that you know is not going to help, I mean, get on the phone and just call and say, hey man, I'm just need to talk it out with someone. Go for a walk. Like have your things in place now before you blow it up. Because now I'm living in a marriage where I'm suffering from things that I had done that I'm not saying they're not being forgiven and we've gotten over, but they always say, right, you can forgive someone, but it's hard to forget how they made you feel, kind of thing, right? And so, you made a lot of mistakes, over your life that you've shared, and I have too, but you're about to enter into another phase of your life where if you don't have a couple of crack here in the case of emergency type boxes that you can, hit for people and places and just habits, right? So that's my encouragement to you because I made all the wrong mistakes, horrible, horrible errors of, things that made her feel abandoned. I'm sure, if I had to leave or if I yelled or screamed or called her names or got it wrong or yelled at the kids or just handled my situation so poorly that now those scars are pretty deep. And so as you enter into this phase and you said you've had a few blues this week, it's like, man, you got to have a few things in place ready to go. Because I didn't, and I tried to do it all alone, and now 5.5 years later, I'm trying to build that community and reach out to some people. I got my brother-in-law here as a resource. I got my buddy, that's got kids, and even Stretch said it. He says, listen, I know up to this age what they might do and how things are going to go. I know how far into this marriage to expect these kind of things to unfold, but I don't know what it's like to have an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old, right? So I've got to learn from those around me, right? So my encouragement to you is to build that community around you. We're trying to build it for more than just you and me too, but go down that path because I know now after the last couple of episodes that you're the avoidant
Right.
and I'm
Yeah.
the anxious. So I'm telling you from a place of love of knowing what you might do in the battle. You might shut down, walk off, right? And it's like, dude, you're going to be the stay-at-home dad. So I know as humbling as this might be to do, go to your wife, tell her how much she means to you, how much you value her, what she's carrying as your child and your future, and let her know how important that is to you and how much you appreciate her being on this journey. Like just those words alone with a hug is gonna just melt her, defense system and just bring you guys back to the same place. And I know that's not a natural default for you, but try and develop that. Well, I try and develop giving my wife a bit more space. You might need to work on closing the gap a little bit because I just I'm not talking to you. I'm just saying I've made all these mistakes, and it's caused so much damage and so much heartache. And now I'm in a place where I'm trying to reverse all that. So
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you for that. And I know a lot of guys out there are probably in similar situations or have been, and they can lean on that as well. So that's big.
yeah, understanding your type is important. So for those out there that aren't reading that book or being in this sort of material, it's blown my mind, and I wish I could go back. So for you and for anyone out there that's about to start having a family, get ahead of this stuff because if you try and do it while you're in it, it's so much harder, and all you're gonna do is reach for the vices that aren't gonna help. So blow me up anytime, man. I know that's not your default. So I'm gonna put a personal challenge out there to you in front of the audience, right? I'm gonna actually say, hey, listen. I need you to blow me up a little bit. And if it's just to call and you just sit there and, pour out what's happening in your heart, that's okay. But just make sure that, you still have a relationship with your wife too. But you do need community outside of your marriage. And you do need guys that you can talk to and someone that's going to encourage you to stay strong and fight the fight, which for those out there that don't know, Ryan's done that for me over the last week himself and just encouraged me through it, a couple of tough times that I've had. And he's actually been able to give me some insight from his perspective that has just helped me this week before my family got in. And it's just been so valuable to have your wisdom because you've got the same type of attachments as my wife and same upbringing, right? Same situation where, divorced parents around 5 and was raised by her mum, same, right? So it's almost like I've got this cheat sheet, right? And you've been an incredible resource for me that's carried me through, and I've been so blessed by that. And sometimes I don't want to lean on you because I know you're the avoidant. I also know that the Almighty has blessed me with this friendship being reignited so that I've got that support. So this goes both ways, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, like, subscribe, share this with a friend. We want to grow this community together, and the only way we can do it is if you take it, hit the share button, send it to somebody, send it to a friend, fellow that you know that might get something out of it, and just let's grow this thing together. You can always reach out to us, info.strengthtoovercome@gmail.com. We've got a great episode next week. We've got a flashback episode with Corey Campbell that's going to launch next week for you, and can't wait to showcase that one to all the viewers and the listeners out there who are standing by each week, listening and tuning in. So make sure you don't miss that. Hit the little subscribe bell notification to get notified when the new episode drops. So, Matt, do you have any closing words for us?
Not at all, mate. I'm going to go hang out with the family and they'll wait patiently for the episode to air just like everyone else. So, again, thanks, guys. We love hearing from you, and the support and feedback is amazing. And for all those that have helped me along to be here and be a father on this Father's Day episode, thank you so much. And to the Almighty for having two beautiful little girls and for what you're about to experience. So, enjoy this time, man, and prepare. And, look forward to hearing from everyone on Father's Day. So, thank you.
Sounds good. Stay strong out there, guys. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.